This submitted material attempts to untangle the confusion surrounding the name Project Freedom by distinguishing between a New Jersey disability housing nonprofit, a humanitarian anti-trafficking initiative, and a major U.S. military operation in the Middle East.
A strong piece of informational writing must immediately orient the reader with a clear, upfront summary of the distinct entities being compared.
Right, getting straight to it.
Exactly. Because, well, the weakness here is that the current draft just dives straight into the separate definitions of these organizations without providing any initial roadmap.
Yeah, I noticed that. It just plunges you right in.
Right. So you're reading about this 40-year history of a New Jersey organization building, barrier-free apartments, and then with zero preamble, suddenly you're reading about human rights frameworks in Asia.
It's a severe case of cognitive whiplash.
It really is. And then a paragraph later, we're deployed to the Middle East, navigating guided missile destroyers. So leaving lay readers or students without a high-level overview makes these subsequent details feel dangerously disconnected.
Yeah, it's like your brain is desperately trying to construct a logical bridge between a housing unit in Robbinsville and a naval blockade against Iran.
Exactly. You're pulling on a tangled extension cord, thinking it powers a lamp, and then you realize you just yanked the television out of the wall.
That's a great way to put it. So what's the actual suggestion here? Because if we front-load the document with a summary of all three massive entities, do we risk, overwhelming the reader with too much context?
Well, the suggestion is to add a brief, jargon-free summary paragraph right at the beginning to outline the core problem. You just need to establish that one single name is shared by three vastly different sectors.
So keep it light. Don't compress the whole essay into the first paragraph.
Right, exactly. You're just handing the reader a set of distinct folders at the very beginning. So a concrete example of this would be to introduce the piece with a highly specific sentence.
Like what?
Something like, the name Project Freedom is used by three entirely different groups: a charity building wheelchair-accessible homes in New Jersey, a humanitarian effort fighting human trafficking, and a U.S. military operation involving 15,000 troops in the Strait of Hormuz.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that immediately relieves the anxiety of the unknown.
It does. When a general audience member reads that, their brain just immediately establishes three distinct categories. Suspense really has no place in informational writing.
Now that the reader has a clear summary at the top, the actual language used in the body of the text needs to maintain that accessibility.
Yes, absolutely. Explaining complex organizational and military concepts requires stripping away highly technical terminology to ensure the general public can easily grasp the differences.
And the weakness here is pretty glaring, right? I mean, the text relies heavily on dense jargon.
It really does. It leans on citations like 501c3 nonprofit organization status or references to guided missile destroyers.
And that bureaucratic label, what was it?
The maritime freedom construct.
Right. I mean, that specialized vocabulary aggressively alienates a student or an everyday reader.
Yeah, they're just trying to understand the basic distinctions, and the text gets hopelessly bogged down in institutional mechanics.
But I have to push back slightly here. If an editor removes a term like 501c3, aren't we stripping the nonprofit of its institutional legitimacy?
Well,
Because that specific designation is the literal foundation of their operational reality.
right, but institutional legitimacy to an auditor is very different from institutional legitimacy to a layperson. For the general public, legitimacy is conveyed through the actual, tangible impact of the work.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah. So the suggestion is to translate bureaucratic or military terminology into simple, everyday language. You want to emphasize the actions and impact of the organizations rather than their administrative or tactical designations.
It's like explaining a car's engine. You don't need to name every valve to explain that the car moves forward.
Exactly. The author is suffering from the curse of knowledge here. They've forgotten what it feels like to not know what a maritime freedom construct is.
It's almost like the military terminology is functioning as camouflage.
Yes. So as a concrete example, instead of writing a 501c3 entity engaged in barrier-free housing, you write a registered charity that builds accessible apartments for people with disabilities.
Oh, that's so much cleaner.
Right? And for the military aspect, take that dense phrase about the maritime freedom construct utilizing multi-domained unmanned platforms and just replace it with A military alliance using ships and drones to protect cargo.
Ships and drones. That's an immediate, concrete, visual image.
Exactly. It strips away the camouflage so the reader can actually see the machine.
With the language simplified, the visual layout of the information must be restructured so these simplified concepts don't bleed into one another.
A logical, sequential structure, utilizing formatted comparisons, is essential when distinguishing the missions of identically named organizations.
And right now, the material visually blends all these descriptions together into dense, blocky paragraphs.
It's a total wall of words. The author transitions from discussing supportive counseling directly into securing global oil trade routes within the exact same visual block of text.
Yeah, which makes it incredibly difficult for the reader to contrast them quickly.
Right. Your brain processes the physical shape of text on a page. When you see a massive, unbroken block, it just signals that this is going to be a tedious slog.
But I wonder if we rely on bullet points, might that inadvertently oversimplify the nuance of these massive organizations?
Well, you have to remember the target audience here. For an introductory guide aimed at the general public, clarity and contrast are far more valuable than exhaustive detail.
Okay, fair enough. So what's the actual suggestion for fixing the layout?
The suggestion is to reorganize the text sequentially. First, explain the nonprofit and humanitarian initiatives, followed by the military operation, and then use a dedicated bulleted list to directly contrast their core objectives side by side.
Can you give me a concrete example of how that side-by-side list would actually look?
Sure. You create a dedicated side-by-side comparison section. Under a mission bullet point, you write, the New Jersey nonprofit focuses on empowering disabled individuals, while the military operation focuses on securing global oil trade routes.
That's a great juxtaposition.
And then you drop down to a tools bullet point. You write, the humanitarian project relies on counseling and advocacy, and the military uses warships, aircraft, and 15,000 troops.
The visual proximity there is staggering. Placing counseling and advocacy half an inch away from warships and 15,000 troops using a bullet point makes the distinction so visceral.
Exactly. The reader isn't forced to hunt through 3 pages of dense text to extract the comparison. It's just isolated and highlighted for them.
Finally, once the text is visually separated, the philosophical boundaries between these entities must be made absolutely undeniable to prevent dangerous real-world conflations.
Clearly articulating the fundamental difference between social advocacy and strategic military objectives prevents any dangerous public conflation of the two.
Which is a huge weakness in the current draft. It notes the different namesakes, but it doesn't adequately emphasize the stark philosophical contrast between them.
Right. On one side, you have a nonprofit that explicitly avoids political issues. On the other side, you have a military operation rooted entirely in international geopolitics.
And the text just treats them as parallel entities that happen to share a name. It leaves this incredible tension completely unexamined.
Yes, and that tension is everything. The suggestion here is to explicitly state the boundaries of each entity's mission, highlight how the nonprofit actively distances itself from global conflicts, whereas the military operation is actively engaged in them.
It's so fascinating that two organizations can share the exact same name, but possess entirely opposite operational philosophies.
It's the most compelling hook of the entire document, honestly. We need to explicitly quote the New Jersey Project Freedom's own guidelines. For a concrete example, pointing out that it does not advocate for or against other social issues.
Because they want to protect their funding and their residents, right?
Exactly. And then you contrast this explicitly with the U.S. Central Command's Project Freedom. You detail that it involves international diplomacy, naval blockades, and the explicit threat of forceful retaliation against Iran in the Strait of Hormuz.
By highlighting what these organizations actively refuse to do, their true identities come into incredibly sharp focus.
Right, which completely eliminates the danger of someone accidentally conflating a local charity with the military alliance.
Okay, to briefly recap the 4 core actionable steps for the listener. Add a clear upfront summary paragraph to establish the map. Strip away the technical jargon for clear action-oriented language. Utilize dedicated bullet points for direct sequential comparison. And explicitly contrast the apolitical nature of the charity with the geopolitical nature of the military operation.
We warmly invite the author to implement these structural and tonal edits. Doing so will make this piece perfect for a general audience and we'd love for you to submit the revised document back for another critique.